Myles Horn, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for joining me today. I want to know, let's jump right into a story. You know, I like to start these things hot. So I've got a lot of interesting questions to ask you, especially about IMDs. And I want to know about your business because it's a pretty particular niche that you do and what you do in New York. Tell me some crazy stories. You've had a lot of experience with condo owners and condo associations more specifically. And when I hear that, I'm like, oh man, you've seen some crazy stuff. Tell me about some of that.
Over almost a 50-year career, you see everything.
Yeah.
I have sat on boards of directors where people, in interviewing prospective candidates who are going to be your neighbors, have asked questions that are so embarrassing that you want to hide under the table.
We're talking co-ops or we're talking condo associations?
In this particular case, we're talking about a co-op corporation, an old one, one where people bought their units for $10,000 or $15,000 many years ago.
And not to interrupt, but for those of you that don't know, and most people in New York know, but for those of you not in New York listening to this, the difference between a co-op and a condo fundamentally is that in a co-op, you're really not buying real estate, right? You're buying shares or a membership interest in a company. So they do have a say in who they want to allow as one of their co-owners. That goes beyond just, do you have the money and you're buying the condo and here's the rules. Very different, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. Boards can often get aggressive, and they have people on them who may not necessarily be qualified to be board members. Right. They don't have the sensibility. So I've been at a board meeting where a woman, we called her La Contessa, because that's how she conducted herself. Asked the prospective applicant first whether her 16-year-old daughter was promiscuous. That's a very good start. And then turns out the woman was recently divorced. She had extraordinary assets, including 3 Rembrandt paintings hanging in a museum in Europe, worth untold millions of dollars. And La Contessa said to her, if you don't work and you're unemployed, how can you afford to live here?
As if that's her business.
Yeah,
correct.
Made no sense whatsoever. Remember, this person was subsequently approved and had to run into La Contessa for the next 20 years.
Right, they're neighbors. They're going to be neighbors. They have to deal with
exactly.
All right.
Lots of stories about people who, in the midst of a deal, decided to take matters into their own hands. I'm going to say early 1980s. I'm buying property in Queens. It's got about 550 units on 8 buildings on a common courtyard. And closing goes fairly well. We send out rent bills for the next billing cycle, and lots of people don't pay us. And of course, we inquire, and they said, oh, the landlord and his nephew went door to door seeking rent payments shortly before the closing, and we gave it to them. In cash.
They didn't tell you that, obviously, and you didn't adjust for that at closing. So that was
not at all.
I mean, that's fraud, effectively.
Yeah, it amounted to $700,000 or $800,000. Wow. And when we called the attorney for the sellers, he said, "How do you want your pain? You want it now or later?" He said, "You can sue these guys."
Right.
You can spend the next several years in litigation and then hope to settle with them, or you can do a settlement with them now. And I think he suggested at the time, we'll keep 3/4, you'll keep 1/4. Right. And I, of course, took great umbrage. I said, absolutely not. Right. We're not doing it. And of course, a year later, we settled for 50%. This is just a modus operandi. This is how these folks
operate everywhere. Yeah, it's just their plan.
Yeah. There are traders, and then there are retraders.
Right.
And then there are people who think they get their bite at the apple not once or twice, but 3 times.
Right. And now you have to control that situation on the tenant side to stop it from happening again. Obviously, you just have to make tenants aware and whatever. But yeah, you're dealing with dirty people out there, of course. And you run into good people more often than not, hopefully. That's what I find. But,
we hope so. My partner used to have a motto. It's actually written across his letterhead, very old-fashioned. And it used to say, doing well by doing good.
Right.
So, we try to conduct ourselves as we wish to be conducted.
Yeah.
We want people to treat us. And it's unfortunate, not everybody operates on the same basis.
Yeah. We do business in both the residential side of real estate and very much in the commercial side of business of real estate. And I find that in the world of CRE, people are professional buyers and sellers of real estate, and you get a different level of knowledge, and I'm going to say professionalism, and that's not a shot at people in the residential business or in the residential world, but you just don't have consumers, and in the world of buying condos and co-ops, you're dealing with a lot of consumers. Like you said earlier, you're dealing with, you're subject to, right? The decisions of even board members who are effectively consumers. They're not professional buyers of real estate, and they live there frequently, always. So there's probably some emotion involved, or some, personal stake in, whatever. You said, and things that go beyond.
When you are the sponsor of an offering plan to convert a building, or when you subsequently buy unsold units or unsold shares, you immediately become the enemy.
Yeah. Of course. Always.
You are deemed to be the bad guy, and you're constantly defending yourself, even though you've done nothing at all to merit that kind of assessment. You're the bad guy. Unfortunately, there's no way around it.
Yeah.
No matter how much good I try to do, I'm always the bad guy.
I think that's a part of humanity. I think people need to have an adversary. I don't know what it is without digging too much into it. I'll never forget a board meeting I went to try to get some units approved, in which there was a commercial space and there were like homeless drug dealers activity going on in there. One night there was like a break-in, and the cops came and they pulled the people out. Like, this is what was going on in this. And we're going to build 3 condos and 3 individual townhouses on this space that were upper scale in price and in value at the time. This was in the early 2000s. And to do that, we wanted 3 curb cuts, right, for parking. And you would have thought the neighbor, and it happened to be in a neighborhood where on that street there was angled parking, so there was more parking than typical, and at the time the density wasn't very high. You would have thought that we were asking people to give up their children. I mean, people came to that zoning board hearing. You should have heard the testimony. It was crazy. We ended up getting what we needed, but what we had to go through was over the top. I think people look for that, that
vehement
adversary.
Out of all proportion to reality.
Yeah.
What we do when we buy a block of unsold shares is we go in there, we make a deal with the co-op or condominium, we pay disproportionately to fix up their building. What could be wrong?
Right.
We may own 50% of the shares, we'll pay 75 or 80 or even 100% to fix up the entranceway, the common hallways, add amenities and services, and we're still the enemy.
Yeah.
We're improving their building. They also profit greatly. Sure. We increase pricing. We still manage to be the bad guys.
It sounds like a good strategy, though. Obviously, the math and the numbers have to work for you. But what do you usually see? What percentage of these buildings or these projects are you usually buying? You're obviously not buying individual. You're buying individual units. You're buying by blocks.
We generally buy blocks of unsold units.
Post-development, so unsold from the developer.
After the date of conversion, the sponsor either doesn't want to do it anymore.
Right.
He's elderly. It's an estate situation, or alternatively, just doesn't want to spend the money to fix up the building. we buy from that sponsor. Sometimes we buy from banks that have taken over the properties. But ideally, we buy unsold units, depending on whether they're occupied by tenants or not. We buy occupied units, rent-stabilized units, at between 20 and 30 cents on the dollar. That's the free market value. This is where we cannot get possession of the unit unless we buy out the tenant.
Right.
We buy free market units that we can vacate at 60 or 65 cents on the dollar. And we've bought them in blocks as large as 700 plus units. We bought 500 units, and we bought packages as little as 20 units. So generally, we're buying between 30% of the co-op and condo, and in some cases, as much as 70%. But I'd say roughly about 50%. But we don't control the building.
Right.
We don't control decision-making. We get a seat or two on the board.
Ultimately, you got to make nice, and you got to make deals, and you got to get everybody you got to create a win-win for everybody. But you also have to have a reasonably high tolerance for pain, I think, right? And just patience, I should say, right? Patience in you're managing people and their, what they feel about where they live.
You have tenants of all types and sorts. You have tenants who are grateful. You have tenants who are ornery.
Sure.
And then you have tenants whose sole job is to make your life miserable.
Yeah. You ever come across it? You're buying 20 or 30 cents on the dollar, the rent stabilized units. Obviously, you've got to make offers and get control of those things. And how often does it happen where you can't? They just won't leave?
Many times. And it's not always about the economics.
Right.
You can offer.
They live there. They've been there for a long time.
You can offer people a fortune.
Sure.
But they're going to tell you, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? They're oftentimes paying a very low rent, which they can't duplicate elsewhere. But sometimes we find them another apartment, and they're still unwilling to go.
Sure.
So those tenants remain our tenants. We're good landlords. We provide landlord services for as long as we own it. With respect to the tenants we can buy out, we also, by the way, offer tenants the right to buy at a tremendous discount from market, meaning they could then sell it and do very nicely. But most of the time, we buy tenants out. And it's interesting to me. I would say the rate of buyouts starts off at 5 to 10% a year and diminishes over time. So at the end, you have hardcore tenants. You're never getting them out. And there is oftentimes a negative between the rents you collect and the common charges and or taxes you pay for the unit. So you carry these negatives.
You have to make enough.
Which is, by the way, something we do. We don't buy cash flow deals. If I had a cash flow deal, I wouldn't know what to do with it. We take calculated risks. We raise enough money to cover negatives and hope that our value add will make up the difference.
And over time, you have to manage, because that's progressive. I mean, that'll build over time as you get more and more tenants that are in rent stabilized, that don't leave. And, you don't want to be years down the road. You've been doing this a long time. So you obviously have to manage, and really, really know what to expect in terms of, because it'll build, right? Even if a project is successful and you walk away with a few rent stabilized tenants that are a little bit negative, fast forward 10 or 15 or 20 years, and that accumulates, and now you might have a real negative cash flow problem.
For sure. The goal, of course, is to get enough vacancies by whatever means you can to cover that negative. So in a case where your negative is $100,000 a year, you get one apartment vacant, you spend money to renovate it, you market it, and you might get back $500,000. So you have to try to stay ahead of the negative. You can't always do that.
But you can't stop, right? You
No.
have to keep doing another project, like you're in a
Yep.
model where you really can't stop and just,
Yep.
sit on what
Yep.
you have. Yeah.
Over a very
Interesting.
long career,
Yeah.
almost 50 years, we've bought between 5,000 and 6,000 unsold units.
Yeah.
There are a lot of stories that
Sure.
that come out of that. They all have not been successful.
Mm-hmm.
We've lived through the stock market crash. We lived through 9/11. We lived through COVID.
Yep.
We're
Great
still here,
Recession, all that.
still operating.
All those things bring opportunities typically, right? On the way up and on the way down.
Yeah, here's the problem.
Yeah.
You have to judge when the bottom is.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's already moving up and it's too late.
Yeah.
Trying to convince investors to buy when it's at the bottom, when they think,
Sure.
oh no, it's going to continue to get worse.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Super hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to have.
But those are the opportunities.
Yeah.
Every terrible time is an opportunity in real estate.
Yeah. Where do you feel we are right this minute?
We're at not a bottom point, but we're coming back from a low point. I think it's going to start to get better. I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
But look, the key to a successful deal, everyone likes to say, we did it. We're the secret sauce that made this work. And I would say on every deal, 70% of it is the market moving with you. We can add 30% in value, maybe a little more, by doing a better job, by trying to figure out something that the previous guy wasn't able to do. But most of the time, you're a hero or a bum.
I want to talk about the IMDs a little bit. You've got this really interesting niche, and we've been kind of pushing up against it, talking about all the condos and co-ops that you buy. But tell me about IMDs. What does IMD mean, and what's that space
Sure.
like?
IMD is interim multiple dwelling. Almost every manufacturing loft building in New York City became obsolete over a certain period of time. It started in Soho, that we're all familiar with, but spread quickly, not just to other areas of Manhattan, but to the outer boroughs, Brooklyn and Queens and other areas. And what happened was landlords could not rent to commercial tenants, so they rented illegally to residential tenants who moved in and who did their own work, plumbing work, electric work, etc., in a non-residential building. They did not have permits. They could not get permits. Sometimes the landlord did it for them, but these buildings were completely illegal for residential use. But the city had a problem. There were tens of thousands of people, meaning voters, who lived in these units.
It got too big for them to just cut it off and say, okay, no more of this.
Right. So
too big to fail.
Right. So they created this loft law, which is the IMD law, and basically they gave a series of goodies to landlords to tackle these buildings and to make them legal. Well, the old landlords didn't want to do it. They didn't want to spend any money.
Define goodies.
Rent increases beyond those that you could normally get in rent-constrained New York City. A portion of the work that you get to fix up the building to also be included in rent increases. But more importantly, any tenant you bought out pursuant to a special procedure called buyout in the statute became free market and remained free market forever. But the problem is, these are highly organized buildings. The tenants know their rights. They hire attorneys. And believe it or not, they fight you when what you're trying to do is legalize the building, essentially to make it safer for them and their families.
Sure.
So it's an interesting mix. First, the loft law is extremely complex
Yeah.
in how you have to convert these buildings. The tenants get a huge say in the process, fight you all the way.
Yeah.
So it's not for the weak of heart.
Right.
The rewards are great, and we do this in a calculated way.
Yeah.
We understand the loft law. We know how to deal with tenants, and most importantly, we spent an eternity doing renovation in buildings that are already occupied by tenants. And so we've been following that game plan for a long time. It was sort of easy for us to move into IMD buildings.
Right.
And we've bought 5 or 6 of them in the recent past, and we're looking to buy most of them. It's interesting. Most people don't want to go near it.
Sure.
And that's why we're attracted to it.
Yeah,
we're
of
attracted to it like a moth to flame.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's probably expensive
Yep.
legally first
Yep.
before any profit shows up.
Yep.
High risk and just painful. So it's a tedious way to do business a little bit. But
Yep.
you sound like you have become accustomed to this patient way of doing business over time. So this is right up your alley.
Yep.
Right?
So New York City
Yeah.
is terribly rent constrained. With the 2019 new statute, it's almost impossible to get rent increases.
Yeah.
Rent increases are extremely small. You can no longer get them for the value of the work that you put in. That's capped.
Yeah.
Everything is capped. But in the field of IMD buildings, there are no caps.
Right.
And that is why it's worth it.
Yeah.
We can't buy a 3 or 4 or 5 cap.
Right.
Our investors demand
Yeah,
a
of
lot
course.
more than that.
Yeah.
We can't make money doing that. So we buy more speculative deals. We take a greater risk, but for far greater returns.
Right.
And quite frankly, we think it's a calculated risk. We're good at it. So far, it's worked out for us. So we'd like to do more of it.
What's the space look like in the IMD space and the loft law space, meaning supply and demand? How many of these buildings have already been converted? Do you think, obviously you probably don't know the exact, but like, and are there new ones? I mean, I guess that they're not like popping up, but how many you think are out there, and how many people live in the space and kind of specialize in it the way that you do?
I would say there's very little competition.
Yeah.
I would say that hundreds of buildings have already come out of the loft law pursuant to this complicated plan, but there are hundreds left. And these spaces in these buildings range from these wide open, giant lofts with high ceilings and tall windows that have been barely improved to basically people who have attempted to make them into regular apartment buildings in the past.
Right.
But they're all sort of unique. They're all variations on the old factory loft building.
Yeah.
And they're very cool places to live in,
Yeah.
but not for everyone. Artists are attracted to them, alternative people, people who want to live in areas that are not necessarily known as residential,
Yeah.
but becoming more so.
Yeah.
It's a unique kind of property.
I'm thinking about the liability for a landlord of a building. That I get it. You can't get commercial tenants. You got a problem. You let people. You invite tenants ultimately to create housing out of there. Now you've got tenants. You got rent coming in, but man, the liability. I mean, you're not. Code is out the window, right? Fire and just liability, and there's a million things that could go wrong. I've been in that position before. I've owned property, and I'm concerned about some. I don't sleep at night when I'm worried that something could happen because we live in a litigious world.
Yep.
City.
Many of these buildings don't have proper light and air.
Right.
Many of these buildings, when we buy them, we have to actually create light and air. We have to either create light wells. We have to knock off portions of the building. The ventilation is improper, you name it.
Yeah.
That's what we buy into. The loft law permits us to do this without having liability,
Right.
so long as we are moving forward
Yeah.
in the process.
Complicated architecturally, some of that stuff.
Very.
Yeah.
And there's only a few people who work with the loft board.
Right.
Requires architects and engineers
Yeah.
and, unfortunately, lots of lawyers.
They always win, right? The lawyers are always the winners.
Yep.
It's the very reason you can't take so many office buildings are unconvertible to residential, because you got a big square,
Yep.
which kind of works for office, but it doesn't work so well for bedrooms and for residential. That's the reason,
Yep. So we have just taken a 260,000 square foot nursing home and converted it to residential condos at 720 West End.
And this is not part of the loft laws thing. This
Nope.
is the separate project.
No.
Yeah.
And we are looking to buy more non-residential use buildings, be
Right.
they office, nursing home, whatever, for that purpose. We only do it to condos, not to rental. Most people are only doing it to rental.
Yeah.
That too requires a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
It's easier to build ground up construction, 17 or 18 stories,
Right.
than to take an existing non-residential use and make it residential.
Right.
It's taken us several years. We're finally open. We are selling units, and thus far sales are going very well. But this is the kind of stuff that we have an appetite for.
Yeah.
Most of the jobs that are being done involve large buildings, mostly in the financial sector, and are converted to rentals.
Yeah.
They're hard. They don't have the proper dimensions. The floor plates are not great. We are ideally looking for 50 to 250,000 square foot office buildings, which can convert more easily.
Yeah.
But again, that's something else we're doing. A lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon, but most of them are reluctant to do condos. We're doing condos.
Yeah. When you say it's harder to do, you mean it's harder than building a ground up 16, 17 story building. I imagine you're saying that it's harder to do, not physically harder to do, obviously, but harder to do in terms of permitting, the legality of it, the actual conversion, the soft cost and the conversion.
Many
work.
times landmarks is involved.
Right.
There's something about constructing an existing structure and converting the use that makes it harder than just building straight up, repetitious, floor after floor after floor, floor plate after floor plate. That is not the case with a conversion.
Yeah.
So it's harder.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting. I don't think that's the conventional thought, right? When you look at a building, it's already there, right? So, right, it's a renovation, but not really.
We've learned this the hard way.
It's not just a renovation.
You know, one of my favorite sayings is, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And you learn by sort of closing the gap, making sure you never repeat the same mistakes. I'm saying we're doomed to repeat 50% of our mistakes.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not the 50% that are worse.
Right.
Every time we find out we've done something wrong, we change our rules. But it's interesting. Real estate, like everything else, is a game of hits and misses.
Of course. Yeah, and big hits and big misses, probably more so than other industries, but you bake it into your pro forma and hope that you've thought of everything that can go wrong. And, over time and with experience, you probably do think of more. Let's kind of move to getting into how you started all this. I like to talk to people like yourself who, everyone we talk to, everyone we interview for this podcast, we talk about people that have deals and who do business in real estate that's a little non-conventional, not typical stuff. Hey, we're building multifamily or whatever. We talk different people from different segments. I think you very well fit into that non-conventional kind of space. So this is good stuff. This is really interesting to hear. How the heck did you start? You started back in the 70s, 80s?
So
you look good, by the way, for a guy who started in the 70s.
Thank you very much. See what cosmetic surgery can do? No, I'm just kidding. For everyone who's listening, no cosmetic surgery. If so, I'd look much better.
Well, those guys have to make money too, you know.
I'm a product of New York City, born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, went to public schools my whole life, child of Holocaust survivors, concentration camp survivors, which formed my being from an early age.
It'll do crazy things to your psyche. I know from
my brother and I were looking to exceed and to succeed in whatever we did. Our parents didn't have the opportunity. So I went to the State University of New York at Buffalo and then got very, very lucky. I got into the University of Pennsylvania Law School, an elite law school.
So you spent some time in Philadelphia, I guess?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I did. And that actually changed my view. Prior thereto, I was a New York City street kid. I had lots of smarts. Yeah. But the education and the people, the different kinds of people that I met at Penn sort of sent me on a different trajectory. I rented my first apartment in New York in 1976. Could have been 5, but I think it was 6. And it was a 1-bedroom with a terrace overlooking Central Park. The rent was $370 a month. My mother pleaded with me, do not do this. It's the beginning of the end. Right. It will break you.
Oh, my God.
Of course, we didn't listen. Right. My wife and I moved in. And about a year or 2 later, as I'm working as a lawyer, and I walk into my building, and I'm handed this big, fat plan. It weighs about 20 pounds. And the doorman hands it to us, and I say, what's this? He goes, I'm not really sure, but I think the building is going co-op. This was the beginning of the golden age of conversions. The only thing that had converted in New York City before were some buildings on Park Avenue, on 5th, and on Central Park West. And those had happened in the 50s and the 60s. This is when landlords first figured out we can make more money selling to our tenants than as a function of cash flow. So we get this book, and I have this 1-bedroom overlooking the park, and its purchase price is $37,000. Obviously, in retrospect, that looks like a mighty extraordinary price.
It doesn't cover the transfer taxes.
Right. We attend the first meeting. Yeah. A little old lady up at the front says, anyone know about this stuff? Nobody raises their hand. Anyone here a lawyer? I made the mistake of raising my hand, although I knew nothing about real estate. Right. And I became one of the heads of the tenants committee. And I negotiated on behalf of the tenants with the sponsor, with the sponsor's attorney. We hired our own lawyer, and I learned this from the ground up. Wow. Ultimately, 100% of the tenants bought. Wow. I bought my apartment for $37,500. I put down $1,000. Wait for it.
Do you still own this apartment?
No, it's better. I got an attorney from Weil Gotshal to buy it from me. I flipped my $1,000 contract for $157,500, thereby quintupling my annual salary as a lawyer. So I said,
this is the business for me.
The head is a little thick, but the light bulb went off. Yeah. And I said, how do I repeat this? Yeah. And so I created a business in New York. I was the first one to do this, buying insider rights in buildings that were converted. And I bought hundreds and hundreds of apartments that way until the landlords got smart and prevented the assignment of subscription agreements and also started to offer buyouts to their tenants. Prior thereto, It was an eviction plan. Tenants only had two choices: buy from the landlord or
Get out.
evict.
Yeah.
I gave them a third choice.
Right.
I'll give you money to do that which you're otherwise going to do for free.
Right.
So that was very lucrative. And then everyone and his mother got involved in the business.
Right.
One day I got from a large Wall Street firm my exact package of documents that I had put together. It had become industry standard,
Wow.
and I knew it was time to do something else.
Yeah.
So I had participated in dozens of these conversions. I said to myself, why not buy it?
Yeah.
And so I went to contract on my first building. It was on 84th between Lex and Park. It was 37 6- and 7-room apartments. Very nice building. And as soon as I went to contract, I got cold feet. I said, what am I doing? I don't know how to do that. So I took in a partner who basically knew the business and knew it well. And so I thought to myself, well, we're going to be 50-50. And then he said, I have a friend also in the real estate business.
Yeah.
We're going to bring him in.
Okay.
Now, all of a sudden,
There's three of you.
I'm a third.
Right.
And then they introduced me to the concept of other people's money. I had previously done this only with my own money.
Got it.
And we found someone, and now I was a sixth of the deal. However, and this is how strange life is, the third partner brought in a partner of his for the money. He was from the Midwest, Columbus, Ohio. And he was a very well-known guy. And I said to my partners, don't we need an agreement with this guy? They said no, because he owned, with my partner, a string of roast beef restaurants in the Midwest.
Okay.
I didn't understand what that had to do with whether we get an agreement with him, but of course, he woke up 2 weeks before the closing, called us and said, what do I want to buy an apartment building in New York for?
Right.
But the good news is he did suggest that he had a friend in Columbus who would do that. And so began my partnership with Leslie Wexner. We didn't know who he was. They didn't publish a Forbes 400. Neither of the three partners wanted to go out there and meet him.
Yeah.
I went out there. Thank God I didn't know how much money he has because we negotiated in good faith.
Right.
We did the deal. The deal turned out to be very successful. And then in turn, we became partners, and he provided the funding to do many, many conversions. We bought several thousand units in many different buildings, all of which we converted at that time mostly to cooperative. And it was very good until the ball stopped rolling in 1989.
Okay.
The stock market crash of 86 affected everything.
87?
Might have been 86 or 87.
Yeah, whatever.
Affected almost all segments of every market, but not real estate, not immediately. And we all thought we were masters of the universe.
Right.
Nothing could affect us. Nothing could go wrong. And boy, were we wrong. What we learned was it took 2 to 3 years for it to catch up with real estate.
Yeah, so the early 90s and the SNL and the bad paper.
In a huge way. And my projects went from having 100 people visiting the sales office on a weekend to 50 to 20, and then to no one looking to buy. And we had created huge negative cash flow. We had vacated our apartments. We'd renovate them. We had all these units for sale. And the band had stopped playing. And you know how we said one opportunity leads to another? I spent several years becoming good at something I never wanted to be good at, which is gracefully giving properties back to the banks.
You and many other people around that time.
But I did it in a way where I just turned the keys over. I didn't give them a hard time.
Yeah.
And subsequently, these banks continued to deal with me forever. So in retrospect, it worked. But here's what happened at the time. If you can imagine a market so bad, those of us either gave the keys back or fought with the banks, but eventually lost them to the banks. Everyone in the conversion industry. And then the banks went broke.
Yeah.
They all went broke, the savings and loans. It was a terrible time.
Yeah.
The government created an entity called the RTC, the Resolution Trust Corporation, which took in all of these assets and started to sell them at 10 cents on the dollar. Even though I had previously bought unsold units, this started, for the most part, the unsold unit business. People started to buy from the RTC, and I got into that business with a vengeance. Buying from banks, buying from other sponsors. So although the conversion business was over, I took advantage of that bad time to buy unsold units from others. And that's what began my major bulk unsold share buying business.
Yeah.
It's interesting the way that this stuff unfolds.
Yeah.
One opportunity does lead to another, although at the time you think this is the end, never going to get better, never going to change.
There's always a new thing, and it does beget another opportunity. The question is, does it repeat itself? Can we look back at these things and say there's cycle? I mean, to a degree, I think there certainly is, but it doesn't repeat itself exactly, right? They say it rhymes, but
we used to say that the New York real estate market had a 7-year cycle.
Yeah.
It would go every 7 years, it would reach a crescendo, its height, and then it would fall and fall precipitously to all-time lows. And then you had to time it such that you bought when the market was rising. But if you bought in that market, it rose so exponentially that it created a new high.
Yeah.
That was the pattern for many years. That pattern no longer exists.
Right.
I don't think anybody can figure it out now. I don't think anybody can suss out where this cycle begins and where it ends. So really what you learn is you have to buy right. The key is buying it right.
Yeah.
The key is having a plan that nobody else has. Think about it. Why should you buy a property that someone else has owned for years and couldn't make money on it? Well, you do it because you think you can do something the other guy didn't.
Yeah.
You think you have some special sauce. You think you have a special way to do it.
Yep.
So buying it right and buying it with that special sauce is the key. And I don't think you can wait. We had a lot of contracts or properties under contract at COVID.
Yeah.
And when COVID happened, we basically moved backwards and we told the people that we were dealing with, we could not buy under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Banks were not available to make loans, etc. And some of those sellers who needed to sell said, okay, what would you buy it for?
Right.
So we took advantage of that opportunity where we could.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I don't think you slow down because of the market. You become more careful buyers. There are always people out there who will have to sell.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, of course. I think that 7 to 10 year cycle, and 7 is really the number, but it's a 7 to 10 year cycle everywhere, I think, exists. It's a short-term debt cycle, right? It's about the amount of time. And often these things are affected by, circumstances outside of our control, macro circumstances. COVID's a good example. Rent control moves inside of the city, governmental decisions, right? Macro stuff. that makes moves in markets, and we don't control it. You can't control it. It's hard to see it it's incredibly hard to see something when you're in it. It's easy to look back over 30 years and go, okay, now I see it, right?
Absolutely.
The hard part is recognizing what's going to happen now or where you are at the moment on that scale.
Like I said, you correct about 50% of the mistakes that you made in the past.
Right.
But you're doomed to repeat some of them.
Yeah, for sure.
And the other thing is, never fall in love with a property.
Yeah, it's a piece of business.
Yeah, but I do.
Right.
I still do.
Yeah.
When driving places, by the way, my kids are old. They're older than you. I still, when driving past a former property, I make my wife and my kids stop and look at it.
Right.
And they say, what are we doing here? First, you don't own it anymore. Mm-hmm. Second, this is really uninteresting. Right. I go and look at them and say, I love that property.
Right.
Look at the stuff I did to make it better. Mm-hmm. They still haven't improved it beyond what I did.
Right.
But by the way, that and $3 may get you on the subway.
No, I get it though. I get it. Real estate is, even when you're in service businesses, as I am, and you have sold companies, and it's not as tangible as real estate, right? You can literally drive by one day and see what you did, and I've done that too. And it's easy to fall in love with it. It's a little bit of a business of passion, even though it's business, and business is business, and you do what you do. But it's definitely a business of passion. Well, you're in a really, really interesting segment inside it, the most competitive, probably, slice of that of the real estate, just real estate.
Yep.
In the country, probably, right? Maybe, you could say in the world, arguably, and it's tough to compete here, and it's tough to find a space that has a lane, and you found some lanes.
Which is why all of the three businesses we are in are all niche businesses. Mm-hmm. They're all hard. They involve knowledge of complex statutes. Yep. And tenants. Yeah. And people just don't want to go.
People don't like doing hard things. Yeah, it's true.
And as I said before, we're attracted to that like moth to flame.
I couldn't agree more. We handle real estate transactions. I like multi-site portfolio deals across multi-states and things that are super complicated, because I know that most of my competitors, most other title companies in this space, they don't know how to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it. And so I'm attracted. And it's more fun and interesting, to be honest with you, for us. It also allows us to do complicated things, which allows us to hire higher level, more competent people. We pay them more, and I'd rather run a business full of people like that. And so,
agreed. Agreed. And you actually learn that most times the tenants are not your enemies. Mm-hmm. They basically need to know who you are, that you're going to treat them fairly. When we buy a property, the first thing that we do is we hold a meeting. We invite all the tenants. And we cater it, food and beverage. Yeah. And we tell people, because we have a lot of elderly tenants, that they get to take home the food, whatever's left.
They're thrilled with you.
And it's a big inducement.
Yeah.
And we tell them, we're going to be the best landlords you've ever had. Yeah. But we're also going to present you with a bunch of opportunities that there's no pressure, but if you'd like to take advantage of it, we urge them to bring in their children, their financial advisors. But you get to understand that the tenants are afraid of you. Yeah. You sort of have to educate them that nothing bad is going to happen to them. So I think we've redefined the process somewhat by saying, hey, we're not the bad guys. Yeah. But we are here if you want to make a deal.
And then you got to hold up your end of the bargain long term and continue to, deliver for them. And, it reminds me of the story, I think, when Larry Ellison bought the island of Lanai out in Hawaii, if you know that story. And he did the same thing. It was a Dole pineapple plantation at some point, became a resort, wasn't successful. He bought it, had an idea for a sustainable island, had big ideas. And there's a population of a few thousand residents there that relied on the only employer that was there, which at one point was a pineapple plantation, became a resort.
Yep.
And now it was what's going to happen. So he put money into the streets and the lighting and the paving and the community center and the pool and the things that matter to the residents there, because he had to have those people on his side. When you're in a position like you're in, where you're going into these buildings and you must have these residents, this board, the people that live there must be on your side ultimately. So it is, yes, it's your business. Yes, you own these things, but it's also, it is, it's democracy. You have to have people on your side. You can't just go in like a bull in a china shop. You got to be diplomatic and you got to be reasonable. And some other folks aren't always reasonable. So you've got to negotiate with that. And you've got to, you have to learn to be patient and kind. That's just the way it is. So I'll just go back to this because it was interesting. Your relationship with Leslie Wexner as an investor ended in the late 90s or late 80s, you said.
It ended shortly after people stopped coming to buy
Right, that was the
units.
end. Right. Long before some of his associates became a little bit more well-known.
I'm going to tell you a story about that.
Yes.
Which I probably should not tell you, but I think your listeners will get a kick out of this.
Great.
Are they listeners or are they viewers?
They're both. They're both.
So we were giving properties back. I was entering into deals with Les to sell him or assign him some properties. And a fellow reached out to me. He actually came through a camp friend of my wife's and who was a prominent person in the real estate business. And he said, this guy would like to meet with you. I said, what about? He said, he has Chinese investors who'd like to invest with you. Like a passenger in a sinking ship, jumping overboard, you reach for every life preserver you can get to. So I said, sure. I said, what's his name? And they said, Jeffrey Epstein. And I met with him.
This is before his association with Leslie even. That was
way before.
Yeah.
I met with him. I talked to him. He asked me all sorts of questions. Didn't know a lot about real estate, but was a smart guy. Asked me questions about what I would do with the properties, how I would handle it from this point, all towards an eye of investing this Chinese money alongside of myself and Les. We had many meetings, many back and forths, and he was ready to invest. And of course, he disappeared.
Right.
Could not find him, could not locate him. Fast forward months later, he replaced the head of Wexner Investments and became Les's financial advisor. So I am...
You're the connector.
Inadvertently.
Wow.
Inadvertently, I may have been that. Having said that, I didn't see him for the next 30 some odd years until it hit all of the newspapers. Strangely enough, many of the properties that I owned, he came to own.
Interesting.
The method and how that happened, not quite certain.
Right.
But it's another one of my maxims. No good deed goes unpunished. Thank God I was never invited to any party. I didn't know him personally. But yeah, I may have been.
You were the connector.
Maybe.
Okay, maybe you were the connector. That's a big piece of history. There's what's the butterfly effect? This happens, and then whatever, off it goes. There's the branch and the and the fork in the road. So
there's a lot of that in a long 50-year career. But that's probably
the most name-worthy or noteworthy for sure. At least. Excellent. Well, this is fascinating. You had a very interesting business model, a very interesting career, and obviously a lot of stories that go along the way. There's probably 100 more that we haven't uncovered. We touched on a few interesting ones. Maybe we'll talk again and dig up some of those more. And I appreciate you coming on. It's been great meeting you.
I'd like that. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Myles.